Hi, 8th graders, or I should say incoming 9th graders. My name is Mrs. Fecto, and I'm the librarian at Beverly High School. And usually I would come into your class in person and get to say hi and talk to you about summer reading. And it's one of the best parts of my year. However, this year, because of my infectious love of reading, the COVID, I'm not going to be able to come in, which I'm sad, but hopefully we will connect during your time at BHS. The library is always open. So the process is similar to what you've had before. The video will explain it, but if you have any questions, you can always email me and I'm happy to answer. And all this information is available on the BHS website under resources. There's a link to the library, and on the library website, it's right there. Okay, I hope you have a great summer. I hope you do read a lot, and I'll see you next year. So these are the books that are on the summer reading list. There's going to be two parts. I'm going to tell you about the process and some ways that you can take part, and then I'm just going to talk about the books briefly, and then you're going to go back to English and learn. So in a nutshell, it's a requirement. Everybody needs to read a book over the summer. Now, you have options. There's the books that I'm going to talk about, which are books that I've chosen because I think that they're valuable and they, worked for me. There's also the Mass Teen Choice Book Award, which that's 21 books that were chosen for being kind of the best things published this year. And there's a voting process for that I'll tell you about that can count as your summer reading project. September 9th, that is the Friday of the first week, full week of school. That's going to be the day that you turn in your stuff. If you have not, you can turn it in early if you want, but if you are doing a physical project, if you like to make art, or if you're doing something digital and it's a big file, you can just drop that off in the library. If you are writing something, there's a Google Classroom that you join and you can upload it there. And if you're doing the Mass Teen Choice or something at the public library, I'll tell you how to do those when we get to those slides. All right, so this link right here is going to take you to the virtual day thing, and it asks you, who you are, who's your English teacher. It just makes it easy for me to keep track of who's turning in what. And it also will link you to the Google Classroom, and it'll link you to the Mass Teen ballot. There's also an option for I choose not to take part in summer reading, which is fine. It'll just impact your first quarter grade. It'll look scary. I believe that's it. That's everything I need to tell you about that slide. All right, so the Mass Teen Choice. Usually we like you to show your creativity in the response piece. The response piece for summer reading is really just because I don't have time to talk to 1,300 kids about what they read over the summer, so it's your way of showing that you read something. So it's on a 4-point scale. 4 points means you read it and you thought about it. 3 points means you read it. 2 points means you read part of it. 1 point means you're breathing oxygen. It's that's simple. For the Mass Teen, the ballot that we have from Beverly High School, it asks you, do you think this book is worthy of the award? Why or why not? What was the most interesting person to you in the book and the most interesting scene? So it's kind of, just questioning. All right, so these are the books on the Mass Teen. I'm not going to go through them. There's a set of Reach interns from Beverly High who made a bunch of TikToks, one for each of the books to sort of raise interest. I'll give you the link for that later if you want to see it. It's at the end of the slideshow. There's also, that will link you to the Mass Teen Choice page. All of this stuff is available on the Beverly High School website, so I'm kind of blowing through it quick. But if you have any questions, you can go there. Or you can ask me in person. So these are books from the middle school. You can read from the middle school list if you want. Ms. Wozniak said that they are the ones that are probably the most interesting to teenagers. So there they are. I plan to read them this summer myself. Okay, the public library has a ton of stuff going on. So on June 16th on Beverly Common, there's going to be a big party, and they have, I think it's free ice cream, live music, and it's to sort of kick off their summer reading program. The main thing that Katie Nelson, she's the teen librarian, she's fantastic. She set this up, and I thought it was bingo, but it's not. It's like a grid that you fill out. Some things are, read a book about such and such, but then there's things like go for a walk, have a picnic. So you check these things off, and you can win prizes, and the prizes are pretty cool. So that's something that you can do if you do a column in there, that'll count as your summer reading. There are also all these activities. Not all of them are book related, but if you go to one of the book related ones, then you can just, Katie can sign off on that, and that can also count for credit. You have many ways to show that you're reading. Okay, so these are just some apps that can help you get your hands on the books. The public library has multiple copies of all the stuff on this list and the Teen Choice list. There's also Libby and Hoopla. Libby has a lot of really good stuff, but sometimes you have to wait. Hoopla is instant gratification. If it's there, you can take it out right away. So they have ebooks and they have audiobooks. And I am a recent convert to audiobooks. Like, I really like them now. And a couple of the ones on the list I listen to rather than read. It's story time. That was my big change up. That was supposed to be like very exciting for all of us. All right, so now I'm just going to talk about the books. This is my favorite part, and I get a little enthusiastic, and that's fine. I broke it up into 4 sections, and usually I am a fiction person. Like, I like a book that tells me a story about a made-up person. But this year, because of like everything we've been through, and honestly, I just want to feel better. So the first set of books are books that have a focus on self-care, taking steps to make your life better. Not necessarily to be a better person, but rather just to, take care of ourselves more. All right, the first book is this. How to Break Up with Your Phone. And before you grab your torches and pitchforks and chase me from the room, I will just tell you that this is not a book about not using your phone or not having a phone. This is a book about being in control of your phone. And I found it really valuable for many reasons. It's broken down into 2 sections. The first section is called the Wake Up, and then the second section is called the Breakup. So in the Wake Up section, she talks about how apps are developed basically to get you to use them as much as humanly possible. So when people talk about, oh, these kids today, they're always on their phones, they don't have any self-control, you know what? They should be looking at the app developers who are really the baddies in this situation. So there's that piece, and the other thing is the idea of the phone as a piece of security. Like, is it there to keep you from getting bored or keep you from looking like you're standing around doing nothing weirdly? And so when I see kids like, just standing there like on their phone, I picture a big fluffy teddy bear. It's like their lovey that they need to have with them if their lovey was addicted to drama and didn't care how badly they felt about themselves. The lovey is a jerk. Anyway, the breakup was the part that they talk about mindfulness, which we'll look at again in a minute, but it's all about being in control of the phone and like, things about notifications, things about, what time do you look. It's basically, don't just pick up your phone when you're bored. It gives you ways of sort of thinking about why am I doing it. That can change. It can change a lot of behaviors. It helped me overcome my potato chip addiction, not entirely, but now I am the boss of potato chips. They are not the boss of me. All right, next up is This Moment Is Your Life. Okay, this book is about mindfulness, meditation. So the whole second half of this book is 5-day challenges, which I thought that would be really fun to do the 5-day challenges this summer, except they involve very bendy yoga, and I don't think that I want to break a hip. But a lot of this is just the idea that be in the now. Don't be obsessing about the past, don't be worrying about the future. Just think about what's happening right now. And it's a really valuable bit of advice that seems like, of course it makes sense, but that has not always occurred to me in life. The breathing, there are a bunch of breathing exercises in here, and I've been breathing for over 50 years. I'm really good at it. But this one showed me some ways that I really wasn't aware of. And the funny thing is there's a senior who used to come into the library every day for senior seminar and just nap in a comfy chair. He'd like put up his computer so he looked like he was working, and then he'd fall asleep. So every day I'd be like, hey, are you okay? Do you need to talk to somebody? And he said, no, it's senior stuff. I'm just tense. I don't sleep well at night. So I told him about these breathing things, and he came back a week later. He's like, oh my God, I tried that breathing and it really worked. And then he proceeded to fall asleep in the chair anyway, because he really loves sleeping. But they are quite effective. So I would urge you, if you're interested, to pick that one up. Oh, these little things that just breathe, be in the now, those are 6-word summaries that I wrote so that I could help sort of quickly talk about every book, with the fewest words possible. Clearly, that's not happening. All right. So I can hear you thinking, Ms. Fecto, sure, mindfulness is a great idea, but I need more firepower. Do you have a book with a jungle cat on the cover? Yes, I do. So Finding Your Fierce is sort of a more high-test version maybe of This Moment Is Your Life, but it digs deeper into the idea of social anxiety. And honestly, you guys are all at peak social anxiety age. Hope you're enjoying it. But I feel like everybody, I'm a pretty social person, and even now I'm like thinking, why does everyone hate me? Am I boring? Is this, what, is everyone in this room currently on their phone? I can't tell. I'm going to pretend like no. Anyway, the idea about social anxiety is that there's different levels of it. Some people just have the general voice in their head. Other people are really debilitated by it. And this is a nice centerpiece. So when I graduated college, I started getting panic attacks, and this was back in the 80s when they didn't know what anxiety, doctors knew, but I sure as heck didn't know. And it was terrifying. I was convinced I was gonna die, obviously. But through learning how, medication, therapy, stuff like these, they help with this. Frankly, getting older helps. You learn to deal with stuff. And this book breaks down a lot of different strategies for managing anxiety, social anxiety. There's general stuff, but they also go deep. They talk about the subjective units of distress scale and the inhibitory learning model, neither of which I had any inkling of what they were. And the nice thing about it is they break it down in language you can understand, and it's just very comforting to know that you're not the only person who's dealing with it, that there are ways that you can then help yourself. So I would urge you, if you have questions about it, to read that book. All right, this book didn't help me at all because I am a fabulous cook. However, it did teach me that I've been making fried eggs the wrong way my whole life. So I tried it the new way, it was better. But what I love about this book is that it's not just, it's recipes, there's 100 recipes in here, but there are also, they define terms like braising, sauteing, blanching. These are words that I had to learn on the street, but you can learn them in this book here. They also talk about safety, kitchen safety, obviously, but what you need to set up your own kitchen. My son's moving out at the beginning of next month, and so I'm like, oh, this is so handy. I put together a little box of all the stuff that he's gonna need. It's just a really good book if you want to know how to cook, but you don't want to, I guess YouTube videos will help, but this is everything all in one pile, and the recipes are really good. So we want you to use your creativity to choose what you do for your summer reading response, but if you should decide to make chicken wings from page 102 or pull apart pizza from page 54 and turn those in on September 9th, I would appreciate it very much. Okay, we're into the next section already. So these are books that help us learn how the world works. They're about social structure and communication. And the first one is True or False. It's by Cindy Otis, and she's a former CIA analyst, so she definitely knows where the bodies are buried. And she's got a really fun way of describing things that are maybe a little bit concerning. So this talks about the history of misinformation, fake news. It talks about Ramses II. They didn't even have printing presses, but they were already smearing people. The demonic hordes of Constantinople, all of these things that we think in history happened that were really just propaganda, or that were something that happened that was blown out of proportion. Basically, the person who was telling the story at the end, they got to say what happened. So it goes from then to more modern times. There's a stop in with smoking. There's a chapter called Smoking is Good for You, which, spoiler, it is not. It's just a really fascinating look at how people have been trying to trick other people. And then it goes into sort of our current age, and it looks at deep fake videos, propaganda, that kind of thing. And it did make me mad because it's sad that something that's as amazing as the internet has been used to really poison the well of human discourse. But it also gave me hope that if we're willing to educate ourselves and willing to look deeply at information literacy, that there is hope for us. Okay. Oh, this one was so good. So there's a BIPOC Voices book club at the public library, and they did one of the meetings at the high school. So this was the book that they read, and I had some available, and I went, and I really loved it. It's so it talks about how the opposite of racism is not being racist, but really being anti-racist, actually opposing racism. And it broke down, so it looks at a bunch of different social structures and how they've progressed to the point where it's not necessarily a level playing field for everyone in our society. But they lay it out in such a way that it makes sense, and it's easy to comprehend, and it's easy to communicate. I have a relative who says things like, oh, everyone's so politically correct these days, and I'm sick of people trying to make me feel guilty for being white. And I just look at him and I'm like, okay, I know that that's idiotic, but I don't know how to respond with anything other than kind of disgust. But this book laid it out so that now I can go and say, well, that's an interesting perspective. Have you thought about this? And it really is, it just gives you, it's a good way to communicate about issues that people find difficult to communicate about a lot of the times. I will say that it is, one of the things that I really liked about it is that there are activities in it. Well, it's beautifully illustrated as well. but there are activities in here that help you look at your own identity and how you yourself fit into the world. And I just found it really, really fascinating and valuable. Okay, this book is a lot. So this is Sapiens, and it's by Sapiens, A Graphic History, The Birth of Humankind. And it's by Yuval Harari. And when people have been recommending that I read this for years, and when I first heard about it, it was the 600-page anthropology book, nonfiction. I'm like, there's no way that I'm reading 600 pages of nonfiction for no good reason. And so Harari came out with a graphic novel version. I like to think just so that I would read it. Who knows? But it's fantastic. It's full color illustrations. It's still a lot. Like, I could only read maybe 4 or 5 pages at a time before I would have to wait for my brain to go back to its normal size. But it's really, really interesting. And I love one of the reviews I read. I don't know if it's from promotional material or not, but it lends itself to the movie trailer voice. So if you'll indulge me. 100,000 years ago, at least 6 different species of humans inhabited the earth. Yet today there is only one, Homo sapiens. What happened to the others, and what may happen in the future? I don't know, but I want to know, so I read the book. I will warn you that there is nudity in this book. It's generally not Homo sapien nudity, but there is some Homo sapien content. There's also little babies that are born out of trumpet. It's very weird. Just consider yourself warned. It's an odd book, but it is fascinating. So there's that. All right, next up. Okay, so these books, I called them books that look back. They're not necessarily history, although all of them have like some historical component. Okay, first up is Games of Deception. This is a book about basketball, which is not my favorite thing. I have a dark history with basketball. Well, it was bad, middle school. Anyway, every year I try to put sports books on the summer reading list, and every year that means that I have to read books about sports, which does have a benefit in that it makes me slightly better at pub trivia. But honestly, usually I remember like vague names. This one, the name that stuck out was Gene Johnson. He was the coach of the McPherson, Kansas Globe Refiners. Now, you may not have heard of the McPherson, Kansas Globe Refiners, but they ended up being half of the first team to go to the Olympics to play basketball. This was in 1936. It was the Olympics in Nazi Germany, the one where Jesse Owens came and just made a fool out of Hitler by winning all the gold. It was also the first year that basketball was an Olympic sport, and they played in mud. They did not know how to make a basketball court. Basketball court, neither would I. Anyway, so this book talks about, it starts out with the invention of basketball, which was in my Lord, it's fallen out of my head. It was in Springfield. And it was created at a YMCA training center, and it was basically to keep young men away from sin. So if you're wanting to stay away from sin, might I suggest basketball? It ended up becoming huge, obviously, as we know. And this book follows the Olympic team from like the ship that they took to get into the heart of the Nazi propaganda machine. And right after was World War II, so those who survived the war, like how it stuck with them throughout their life. It's just it's an interesting story, and it's how basketball has sort of, had staying power. All right, this next book was the one that definitely taught me the most about stuff that I didn't know, because I had no frame of reference for starting it. So it's Kicks, it's the Great American Story of Sneakers. And I knew that like sneakerheads were a thing, but I didn't know to what degree. So when I started reading this, I saw this kid, and he was wearing very cool looking sneakers. So I pulled him aside, "Excuse me, young man, may I ask you some questions about sneakers?" And he was really cool, and he filled me in about stuff, but he told me that the first thing he notices about someone when he meets them, or even just like looking around the halls, is what they've got on their feet. And I was like, there are 900 things that I notice about a person before I notice their feet. It was, kind of a weird disconnect. But this book has the history of sneakers. It talks about the vulcanization of rubber. It talks about plimsolls. It talks about cooking sneakers in a waffle iron. But it also looks at the modern, it looks at the sneakers of today, and how different companies started out, what were the good ones. I found out in reading this, I knew that my friend's husband was he was the first guy to put sneaker reviews on YouTube. He was called Sneak Geeks with a Z, which is hysterical because he seems like a perfectly normal person now. But so I interviewed him for this, and he had at one point over 500 pairs of like very expensive, very fancy sneakers. and he ended up selling them to get Bitcoin, but he still like has 50 pairs of sneakers, and he was like showing them to me all excited. It was just, it's really interesting, this piece of culture that I didn't know. What I loved about this was that they talk about how sneakers and, well, basketball mostly, but really all forms of athleticism, how they sort of continually push each other to advance. And I just thought it was a really neat kind of, I don't know, ecosystem that I'd been unaware of. Oh, thank God, we're finally in my wheelhouse. Okay, fiction. Can you believe I've talked this long and not gotten to fiction? So, A Place to Hang the Moon. This one is, it's actually written for probably 4th, 5th, 6th grade, but I loved it. I read it in an afternoon. I cried like a baby. It's on Hoopla if you want to listen to it. If you're somebody who has younger brothers or sisters and you want to read with them, if you do childcare, if you babysit during the summer and you need like a rainy day activity, may I recommend this? So it's about these 3 kids, William, Edmund, and Anna, and they're like 9, 10, and 12. And it opens up at their grandmother's funeral, which seems like it would be sad, but actually it's kind of okay because their grandmother was awful. So their parents died when they were toddlers, and their grandmother has been minimally taking care of them the rest of the time. She's wealthy, but she's always telling them, you know, oh, it's such a sacrifice for her to have to take care of them. And so when she dies, they're not relieved, but they're not broken up. The thing that's a problem, they find out from her lawyer, is that there is no one to take care of them. They don't have any other family, and so the lawyer's like, well, I've got good news. The Nazis are bombing London. And so, not good news, but during World War II, the Nazis bombed London, and a lot of parents sent their kids out to the country to live with strangers, just to keep them safe. And so these 3, they sign up to go out in the country, and they end up living with a few different families. And I'm just going to have a minor spoiler in telling you that they do find a family at the end, because this book would be absolutely bleak without that. But throughout it, you see like how different families are and really how they depend on each other. And it was just a really wonderful story. And there's a little sidelight about how books bring people together, and I can't help it. They do. Okay, oh, here we go. All right, so every year I ask the faculty, mostly the English teachers, because they know how to read, but I ask them to recommend a classic writer for summer reading. And this year, Dorothy Parker was recommended. And I was kind of taken aback because I love Dorothy Parker, but she's not a novelist. I don't think of her as somebody, you know, for summer reading. I think of her mostly as a poet. She's a very prolific poet, but she also wrote short stories that won awards. She wrote reviews in like Vanity Fair, Vogue, The New Yorker. She went to Hollywood in the 30s, so she wrote from probably right before the 20s till she died in the 60s, but she was most famous in the 20s and 30s. And she wrote the screenplay for A Star Is Born, the movie with Lady Gaga. That was a remake of the screenplay that she wrote. She actually left Hollywood during the Red Scare. They thought she was a commie, and she came back to New York. So in New York, there's this hotel called the Algonquin, and there was this, I don't know what you call it, group of writers who used to go in there in the 20s and 30s, and they'd sit at this round table and they'd just, you know, say clever and cutting and mean and snarky and intelligent things to each other, and people would write it down. So Dorothy Parker was a member of the round table, and at the time she wasn't the most famous member, but now she's definitely the one she had the longest staying power. So her life was not a happy one in spite of her success. A lot of her poems are kind of depressing. She lost, I think both of her husbands died by suicide. At least one of them did. Her mother died when she was very young. She never felt loved, and you can see it in her writing. But it turns out that when she died, and she's not somebody I ever thought of as particularly, you know, political, but she left her estate to Dr. King. And when he was murdered, the money went to the NAACP, and she was actually buried in the garden of their headquarters in Baltimore. And so when I was researching her for this, I found this quote that is what her memorial said. And it said, "Here lies the ashes of Dorothy Parker, 1893 to 1967, humorist, writer, critic, defender of human and civil rights. For her epitaph, she suggested, 'Excuse my dust.' The memorial garden is dedicated to her noble spirit, which celebrates the oneness of humankind and the bonds of everlasting friendship between Black and Jewish people." And when I read that, I kind of teared up, because here she never felt loved, and she was in the end. So thanks, Wikipedia, for that little bit of information. If you are interested in poetry, you can't beat Dorothy Parker. All right. I mean, maybe Shakespeare. I don't know. Head-to-head battle. Who can tell? Okay. I don't think of this book as historical fiction, but I imagine you will, because it takes place like, you know, around the time that I was getting ready to be born. So did any of you read The Outsiders when you were in middle school? Just cough or grunt or make a noise. Okay. Nice grunting. All right, so this book was inspired by The Outsiders. It's Jennifer Matthew who wrote it. She wrote Moxie and a bunch of other books that I really liked. And she decided, she started thinking about The Outsiders from a female perspective, like what would have been like if we had seen the inner life of the female characters in The Outsiders. And so she wrote this, and our main character is Evie. Is it Evie? Now I'm doubting myself. Sorry, it's not important to anyone but me. Yes! Okay, Evie is a bad girl. She hangs out with this little group of, her little gang of friends. She wears too much makeup. She laughs at inappropriate times. She does not care at all about school. And, her whole group is obsessed with these bad boys, So they're like the female equivalent of the greasers. And what happens in the book is that she and her friends are at the drive-in one night. She gets separated from them, and something happens that to us as a modern reader, we see it coming a million miles away. She is completely taken by surprise, but she ends up being rescued by this girl, this Soch girl, who has just been away, and she's come back to town, and there's something mysterious about her. So the book is about friendship, and it's about who you owe your friendship to, who has your back. It's just really, it kept me interested the whole time. Okay, now these are books to look forward to. This is the last section, and these are the fiction books, and we are working towards the romance books, which, I know some people just curls their hair, but they're going to be in here. But these are basically fiction about kids who are moving towards college careers and away from secrets and lies. So the first one is Off the Record. If anybody likes a mystery, the next two you're going to like these two. So Off the Record is about this girl, Josie, and when she's 17, she wins a contest to write a celebrity interview, but a long form celebrity, there's a word for it, which I cannot remember. And so she starts following this guy, not in a creepy way. She's paid to go follow this guy, Marcus Canute. He's like the it boy, He's an up and coming movie star. He's like Timothy Chalamet 2 years ago, but with more common sense. Anyway, he ends up. In interviewing him, she also interviews other people around him, and she finds out that the guy who made the movie that he's starring in, he's a huge, very powerful guy in the movie industry, and he's also a sexual predator. And he's been just ripping a swath through Hollywood, but nobody's saying anything because they're afraid that that's going to be the end of their career. So she's trying to get people to talk on the record, and nobody will. But she's very tenacious, and she figures out what's going on, and it's just if you're interested in journalism, I cannot recommend it highly enough. All right, the next one. This one was really good. When I read, I'm not really good at setting. I sort of picture every book happening at my best friend from elementary school's house, because she had a cool house. But this book it's set in a township in South Africa, and it's just the way that Mala Nunn writes, she just really puts you in that space. So it's about this girl, Amandla, and she's, I think, maybe 14, 15, and she lives with her mom in the township, and her mom is a problem. Her mom is the only white person who lives in the township. She's also mentally ill. She has some days where she can get up and get dressed and go to work and everything's okay, but there are some days that she just sits on her cot and talks about Amandla's father and how he's coming back. Amandla has never met her father. He disappeared before she was born. He's not coming back. And so she's kind of parented her mom her whole life. So it turns out one day her mom's having a really bad day. There's no food, and she's foraging for change, and she goes in her mom's purse and she finds a big wad of cash and an envelope with a mysterious address on it. And I don't know about you, but I love a book where somebody finds a big wad of cash in a mysterious envelope. So Amandla takes the envelope and she starts investigating, and so she finds out her mom's history, but her own history, and it's so fascinating. It takes place after apartheid was over, but the racism is still, brewing. And so I had a really good ending for this one, and I've just dropped it. Oh, so there is a little bit of romance in here, but it's mostly family drama, and I loved it. All right. Okay, so now we're headed into sort of the lighter fare. This one is so cute. It's I'll Be the One. I love a fat girl book. And this one, in this book, Sky Shin, that's how she identifies herself. So she's fine. She's got a little chubby belly, but she's super active. She loves to dance. She loves to sing. Her mother is a different story. Her mother is obsessed with her body, with Sky's body. And she's like, you should be thinner. This is not okay. And she's very traditional. And Sky, it's not like she's trying to be emotionally abusive, but she kind of is. She thinks she's doing it out of love, and that's a big conflict between Sky and her mom. Now the other thing is, so the main part of the story is that there's this South Korean reality show. It's like a talent show. And Sky is bilingual, and they're doing auditions in LA. So she's like the first person in line, and she gets a spot on the show. It's not a spoiler to tell you that. That's the whole point of the book. Anyway, so it's about what she is, how she has to deal with the judgment on the show, but also like the judgment from the internet and what that's like. And so it's just a really, if you're interested in K-pop, if you're interested in reality television, it definitely will be of interest to you. All right, there are two more. This one, charming is a verb. This one was the funniest one on the list. It was, I listened to this on Hoopla, and it was kind of like a 7-hour podcast that I never wanted to end. So the main character in this is Henry Haltewanger. They call him Halty, and he lives in like a super nice apartment building in New York City, right on the park. He goes to the most expensive or the most fanciest prep school in New York City. His best friend's the son of billionaires. He like has that smile that like lights up a room, super handsome. He's got an affect about him that like when you meet him, you feel like you've known him forever, like he's your best buddy. But he also has like another side to him. He's always hustling because the building that he lives in, his dad's the super, they live in the basement apartment. The school he goes to, he's on a scholarship. So he feels like he has to sort of, scheme a little bit to sort of stay, I don't know, parallel to the people around him. So he has some business dealings that they're not illegal, they're not even unethical really, but they're just, I guess sketchy is the word that you would use. So the book concerns two different sides of his life. One is he's obsessed with getting into Columbia. That's been his dream since he was a little kid. And so there's a lot in here, most of the book. Everybody's a senior in high school, and there's a lot about sort of getting into college and the pressure of that from yourself, from your family, the whole process. And then the other piece is there's this girl who lives in the penthouse of his apartment. She's a little weirdo, and she does not, she finds out about one of his business ventures, and she's blackmailing him. And she says, if you, I won't tell anybody about what you're doing if you help me become more social, if you involve me, because he's very popular, in your group. And it's not because she wants friends or she wants popularity. It's because she's trying to get a reference letter for college from a teacher. And the teacher was like, well, you're a little reclusive. I think you need to, get involved more socially. So she's like, ugh, people are awful, but fine. And so she uses Halty to help her with that. I will just tell you that this turns into a love story, of course it does, but it's not what you think. So I highly recommend it, and it's very, very funny. It's probably the funniest one on the list this year. Okay, here's the last one. It wouldn't be summer reading without a summer camp book. So this one is about this girl, Abby, and it starts out with her, she's not having a good year. First of all, she's like addicted to consequences. She does not have any self-control whatsoever. She's doing really badly in school. Part of it is that her grandpa, who was like she loved her grandpa. They were so close, and he's died like a year ago, and she's still acting out. Part of it is that she's got 3 little brothers. She's the oldest. She's supposed to be the responsible one, but she doesn't want to be. And then she had this incident with her best friend Leo that was like a, kind of like, hey, I like you, do you like me thing that didn't go very well, and now she's trying to repair that. So Leo he's adopted, and he wants to find out about his birth parents, and so he wants to do a DNA test. So Abby's like, yes, a DNA test, that would be a perfectly normal activity for 2 friends who are just friends to be involved in. So they do the DNA test. Well, his is kind of inconclusive, but hers shows that she has a sister 2 towns over that she had no idea about. And it's like, it's not a cousin, it's not a half-sister, it's like these two people have the same parents. And so she looks up this girl, Savannah, she goes by Savvy, and she's an Instagram influencer. She like does health and wellness and beauty, and she's very polished, and she's very, like, she's a rules girl. You know, she does what she's supposed to do, and exactly the opposite of Abby. So the two of them meet, and they decide, rather than ask their parents, hey, what's the story with the secret sister, which would make this book 40 pages long, they decide to go away to camp together, where Savvy is a counselor who's constantly catching Abby doing stuff, and she's getting in trouble. Tons of conflict, tons of fun. I will tell you that it has, let's see, I made a list. There are adventures, romance, mudslides, dogs, photography, and a solid ending that clears everything up, which I love. I hate it when they drag it out so that you have to read the sequel. It was just really fun. This is probably the closest thing to a beach read that's on the list. So that is the end of the books. There is, usually I do a Q&A at this point, and that is to, you know, just give people the opportunity to ask questions, but they always ask the same question. So my interns helped me do this, and I'm going to show you because it went over big last time. It's going to be loud. Brace yourself. It gets super loud. Okay, so there's that, and there's one more. So this QR code, I had 2 interns. The Mass Teen Choice Book Award had 2 interns. They're the ones who taught me how to do that. It'll never happen again. But they made TikToks for all of the books on the Mass Teen Choice Book Award. And if you're interested, that's QR code. I'm done. Go away. I mean, applaud first, because seriously, I just tap dance for 40 minutes up here. All right, thank you so much. If you have any questions, come see me. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next year.